Hi everyone, the Camcycle monthly meeting is kicking off. Give us a like or a comment so that we know you can see us and that you've joined us, and we'll wait a little while everybody gets on board. Excellent. So before we get through into our guest speaker, which is Mark Philpotts, I will just introduce our Spaces to Breathe campaign, our all-encompassing campaign about getting better spaces for breathing, exercising, walking and cycling during lockdown, but also thinking about beyond the lockdown as well. We've really broken this up into 3 phases. We're thinking about what we need to do right now to work together to keep everyone in our community safe when we're getting our essential exercise, for key workers who need to walk, cycle to work, if we need to make those essential journeys to get our groceries and so on. We're really asking people to let us know if there are places that they're finding they don't feel safe at the moment, if they really can't get the 2 meters of distance between other people when they're walking past, or if there are roads that are too dangerous to step out on when you're trying to get that space. So please do go and visit our Spaces to Breathe page on our website, and let us know if there's some spots that you're worried about, or if you've seen somewhere where there's just a perfect opportunity to recapture a bit of space. So there is, just feels better when we're out there trying to get a walk. You know, children need a bit of space to stretch their legs, get on their bikes, get on their scooters. So if you see anywhere where there's potential, we really want to know about that, and as soon as possible, because things are moving quite quickly here. So do jump on to Spaces to Breathe and let us know about those opportunities. But also on that page, we have our open letter where we are calling for our local decision makers. And we're very broad in that because we've got so many departments we could be referring to here, so many local authorities. We've got the Combined Authority, the Greater Cambridgeshire Partnership, the County Council, the City Council, South Cambridgeshire District Council. You know, even further afield than that, we've got the other councils. So we're just calling it decision makers, and it's an open letter asking them to take urgent action to make sure we have that safe space to breathe, walk and cycle when we're getting out and about. We've already had 110 people, more than that, sign up to this letter. We're particularly keen to have all of the individuals who support our campaign, but we also want to see businesses saying we need this to help our business thrive, doctors saying this is important for public health, teachers saying this will be important when children start coming back to school. So we're really, really looking for these different stakeholder groups to sign the letter. So please get on there, sign it yourself, share it with your school, share it with your boss, share it with your doctor, and ask them to sign the letter as well. And I've seen on the comments on Facebook that we're just seeing the editing view of the slides, and that is because if I do anything else, my laptop just has a bit of a meltdown. So I hope you can see enough in this format. So please get on and read our open letter. Again, it's the same page, Spaces to Breathe. Share that as much as you can. We've had some pretty positive progress with this already. We had an announcement from the Mayor of the Combined Authority, James Palmer, just yesterday saying that he's looking for schemes for pop-up cycle lanes. And that was following a meeting that he had in Westminster with ministers and I believe even the Prime Minister. So there's clearly something happening in this space. We've been told that these schemes need to be presented ASAP. So it really, really, really is important that we get those ideas down as quickly as we can and get them to the County Council. But also we need to show our councillors that they've got that community support to make some brave decisions. So the letter and the ideas, if there's ever been a campaigning ask that we've made, this is it. Please, please, please do jump on board and share that page and sign it. I think I've said it a few times, but yeah, I think you've got the message now. In other big news, we've also had the first parts of the Chisholm Trail Bridge delivered yesterday and today. So that's huge. And if we were in a room together, I think we'd all be having a big cheer and a big round of applause. So I'm just going to stop for a minute and let everybody have a big yes moment and a clap, because this is huge. The Chisholm Trail Bridge has started. So we've waited 20 years for this. I want to see some claps on the Facebook comments if we can. But well done, Camcycle, for so much campaigning, and the GCP for finally making it happen. I'm sure there's other news, but I really feel like I've waffled on for long enough. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to introduce our guest speaker. Now, our guest speaker is known to us because he came to our AGM. And for anyone who did not feel that they had enough time with Mark Philpotts or the Ranty Highwayman, well, we have got a treat. We've got a good hour with Mark this evening, and I'm not going to waffle on anymore. I've had enough of my own voice. So Mark, please, can you tell us a bit about your background, and then your presentation about Beyond the Bicycle, and also what great timing, because Mark has lots of insight, knowledge, good ideas about what can be done right now, which will help our campaigning for spaces to breathe as well. So I hand it over to you. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Roxanne. Yeah, apart from being an idiot with a computer on Twitter. So yeah, I'm highway engineer, civil engineer originally, but I've kind of specialised into highways. My day job, I work for the Scandinavian company BICYCL. We've got presence all over Northern Europe with a big emphasis on cycling, which is great. And my day job is walking and cycling design. I blog, I write, but most importantly for tonight, I'm here to talk about Beyond the Bicycle. And I'll go through who Beyond the Bicycle are and what we're all about in the presentation, really. So I'll crack on, I guess. And Roxanne seems to have frozen, but I'll carry on regardless. You're back, thumbs up. Okay, so I can share my screen and hopefully, I think we're there. Can I thumbs up from anybody? Yes, the screen is shared. Excellent. Right, so I thought I would start just with nicking one of Camcycle's logos. I think we'll have a nice Beyond the Bicycle Christiania bike there, because that's what I've got. So that's always good fun. So so that's me. I guess the point of the presentation tonight is I'm coming at this from my point of view, and my point of view is different to yours and everybody else's. So coming at it as an engineer, designer, somebody that rides, this is one of my bikes here. This is M3276, which is a nice upright Dutch bike, but I've also got the Christiana tricycle. So yeah, my experience. But I think we're increasingly finding that there's lots of other people have their own experiences. Everybody's different. Everyone uses bikes in a different way. And so it actually turns out, so for an engineer, it's very difficult that this all boils down to, it doesn't boil down to numbers. You can't quantify everything. So who are we, Beyond the Bicycle? Set up in 2017, and we're essentially a group that represents the users of non-standard cycles. And we sort of, we're here to facilitate discussion, develop ideas, to improve infrastructure, facilities, recognition, and that's people and the types of cycles we're interested in. Reducing user costs, so things like cargo cycles, electric cycles, they're very expensive. We want to try and explore ways of getting the prices down. Primarily we're London based, but we're talking to people all over the country. And the inclusion here is it's anybody who's interested, and they can they can get the point of what Beyond the Bicycle is, which hopefully I'll try and explain a bit tonight. So we're including disabled people, cargo bike users, freight cycle users, family cyclists, and there's a list. So this is kind of a bit of a background of who we are as people in the coalition, and we don't all have the same hat. We're all people with different threads, but I think we've got quite an interesting mix of people who come at things from a different direction. And yeah, we're not one thing. We're not one type of group called a cyclist. We're people, just like in real life. Funny that. So what's wrong with the word bicycle? And our bicycle is not exclusively banned, but kind of banned in the coalition because we're trying to expand people's horizons. So we think that the word bicycle can limit one's views who might actually be able to ride a cycle. And the photo there is of Isabel, one of the coalition, and also you'll know her from Wheels for Wellbeing, using her hand cycle attachment. And people might recognise a few other people in some of the photos later as we go along. So yeah, the bicycle is a two-wheeled machine. We're talking about any wheeled machines, any type of machines, whether the pedals or hand cranks, and any variety you can think of. Bicycle limits the view on the machine. So, you know, that's not a bicycle, that's a tricycle with a refrigerated sort of cargo hold at the back. So bicycle can limit our view on the types of machine available. Here's another cycle, it's got 4 wheels and what's that, 12 people on it? So yeah, the word cycle is the inclusive term that we've adopted. And you know, the world's our oyster. We can go as far as our imagination takes us with these. So people are diverse, and that includes the fact that people do change with time, and it could be you know, a short-term thing. So you may have an injury that means you can't cycle as well as you could or at all. We will get older, everyone's got different levels of mobility. So it's important to recognise that diversity. Cycles are diverse, and what we use our cycles for is also diverse. The photo there is of a tricycle on the Woolwich Ferry, believe it or not. Just again, it's beyond the bicycle here, we're trying to join things up. And cycles are mobility for so many people. Cycling is easier than walking for many people. I think we've heard that a lot on Twitter. There are people who can cycle for miles and miles and miles all day, and they really struggle to walk 100 yards. It's amazing how cycling transforms people's lives. It's for families, as modelled in the photo there. We know we can shift goods around. We can also replace car trips with cycle trips. And we're also about infrastructure design, which is enabling. And yeah, there are 2 barriers to be removed, and that's the physical ones that we will know about, especially Cambridge. You've had a few barriers recently that's made the news. But it's also about barriers that society put up, you know, attitudes, the way people behave, how people are portrayed as well. This is quite an important thing for us. So in terms of disability, we've adopted and we support the social model of disability. And you know, lots of different definitions, but the important thing is here, it's a model of disability that disabled people have themselves developed. And I've got Scope's definition on the screen here. I'm not going to read through everything here. But barriers is, you know, it's not just about physical things, it's attitudes as well, and assumptions. I will make the slides available afterwards somehow, and we'll let you know. So, as I said at the beginning, I'm a highways engineer, so some of this presentation now is kind of tweaked towards my interest in life. If another member of the coalition were presenting, they'd come from a different position. But in terms of the social model that talks about barriers, for us as engineers, a lot of things are about the physical barriers. So if we're thinking about how the barriers might apply to highways design, how may that apply to attitudes, what design decisions can be exclusionary, and what about hidden disability, autism, anxiety, epilepsy are good examples, and what about visually impaired people? Yeah, we talk about cycling. People with visual impairment do cycle, but I think what lots of people think about when we talk with infrastructure is how can visually impaired people negotiate the infrastructure we're putting in for cycles. We have a manifesto, so we're about infrastructure, and we're promoting infrastructure that's inclusive for all types of cycles. And there's again, because we're London based, we refer to the London Cycling Design Standards. We're interested in a tube map for London, which talks about all the fully accessible cycling routes in the capital, because even things posted as a cycle route are just not accessible. We want to ensure that disabled people, cargo people, freight families, all types of cyclists are consulted in the design and development of new cycle infrastructure. Example on the screen, Deliveroo, You know, it's a big bike, it needs some space to turn. You know, we need to accommodate these guys. We're pushing for subsidies and incentives, as I mentioned earlier. So things like the government has these subsidies for electric vehicles. We'd like that properly extended to e-cycles and cargo cycles and things like that. And we're also about sharing knowledge about this sort of thing. Facilities, obviously, so end of your cycle ride, where can you park? How can you store a cycle at home? How's that made inclusive? At the moment, cycle hire providers in the UK, there's nothing which is fully inclusive. They're all bicycles. So is there a way that we can actually get some more inclusive cycling out there for the hire bikes? The photo on the screen is Malmo, their central station cycle park. And what they've got here is sort of set of steps here you can see on the screen. There's a wheeling ramp, but around the other side, there's a very long ramp down into an accessible cycle parking system. Recognition, so that's recognizing that there are non-standard cycles. So let's have pictures of cargo bikes, pictures of tricycles such as Kevin here on this recumbent. We want to improve recognition that cycles are green. They're good for health, good for mobility, as it's a solution for quite a lot of people. So a little bit of design then. So beyond the bicycle means coming up with designs that can accommodate, enable anybody to cycle. We have design standards and guidance, which are important because people like me rely on them, and we don't always understand the issues. I would say on the photo there, the Crow manual from the Netherlands is kind of the gold standard for cycling infrastructure design. And when you can compare it with some of the UK guidance, we're miles and miles behind. But also, if we see good things and people come to us with good examples, we'd like to promote it and celebrate it and give the due credit, because we talk about bad stuff a lot, but we'd like to talk about the good stuff and show engineers how things should be designed. So I do a version of this which goes into a lot of design detail, which I won't be going into tonight, but just to give you some flavour of some of our design principles that we're interested in. So coming at this from a design point of view, we need to recognise that people use cycles as mobility aids. Some people cannot dismount, or they find wheeling their cycle difficult. Adapted and non-standard cycles cannot be easily lifted. They're very, very heavy. And people need space within which to move and manoeuvre. The photo there is from Bristol. Now, I only found out about this a couple of weeks ago. I guess one of the positives of lockdown, I'm doing lots of reading, lots of talking. But we now have a 30-degree splay curb in the UK. This is in Bristol. And you can just see the shape there. The reason that's important is if somebody goes too close to it, they're not going to be thrown off the bike. It's low enough to stop the pedal getting caught. But from a beyond the bicycle point of view, cycle users will be able to get up onto the pavement, to go into a shop, get to cycle parking or things like that. So for users that cannot dismount, that kind of slope there is just about right. They have to go down to a low speed and attack it in a sort of square fashion. But that's much more inclusive than an upstand, vertical upstand. People cannot get off that. So these design details really, really matter. We want layouts that are intuitive and legible. So as you're looking ahead on the street, you can understand how it works. You don't have to think about it too much. It's not too complicated. If you have to read a complicated sign to work out where to go, the design has failed, for example. People need smooth surfaces. We're dealing with wheeled traffic, so we want smooth surfaces. Steep gradients and crossfalls are very difficult to negotiate for some people. So if you have a tricycle or quadricycle, if you have a steep crossfall, it tends to pull the bike downhill. If you have a very steep gradient, the sheer weight of some of these cycles means it's very hard to get up, and actually going down is difficult on the braking. And we'd like to see separation of walking and cycling space. That should be the normal approach. And the graphic on the side, simply because we haven't built one of these in the UK yet, just shows a completely continuous footway and a cycle track, all at a nice even level. And with these curbs, front and back, drivers have to expel the energy getting over them. That's what we're about. nice and smooth, nice and simple, nice and easy. And also, as I said earlier, we need to make sure our designs are accessible to other people. So the big controversial thing, if you like, is floating bus stops or any floating infrastructure where a person has to cross the cycle track to get the bus or to cross the main road. But through design, that can be made accessible. And it's trying to get beyond just visually impaired people. We're interested in how people with learning difficulties may get around, people with hidden disabilities as well, who rely on different visual cues or street layouts that are not too complex. We're after gentle crossfalls, as I mentioned, asphalt to asphalt connection, so we don't want to be bouncing down curbs and up curbs, and machine laid asphalt for cycle surfaces. And people say you can't do paths 2.5 meters wide. Yes, you can. There's the machine just there. No staggered barriers. Bollards should have a clear air gap of 1.5 meters. So that stops the car getting through, but allows any kind of cycle through. Forgiving curbs, as I mentioned, these gently sloped curbs adjacent and giving access to the footway. And if we do have to use drop curbs, they should be flush, because if you're cycling up an upstand, it can damage the cycle, it can tip people out, and they should always be perpendicular to the line of travel. And signage at a human scale and position. So we're not going as fast as a driver may be, but we're not going as slow as somebody walking might be. We need the signage to be appropriate for cycle traffic. I've mentioned separate space, avoiding road humps where possible. If we have to use them, sinusoidal humps as in the photo. Rumble strips are painful for many people, so we don't like those. Detection of cycle traffic rather than push buttons, especially at the moment. There's been in the news about people having to use push buttons, whether somebody may have been infected with the virus, leaving it on the push button. And generous turning radii. Some of the adaptive cycles need a huge amount of space to turn. It's absolutely astonishing. Some of you may recognise the photo. I did put Malmo's one in, but I thought, I've got a photo of Cambridge here, so I should probably use that. So that's space in cycle parking at the ground floor, reserved for, in this case, cargo bikes, but equally any adaptive cycle really. I think there's only a couple of cargo bikes there, but the intention's there. Cycle parking at building entrances. So again, it's about making cycling easy and accessible. Detectable curbs between footways and cycle tracks. So curbs are an important tool, which are kind of there because we're separating people from motor traffic, but where we are putting curbs in, we need to separate cycles from walking traffic, just so people can detect their space. And then a cameo from my tricycle there and some barriers that I simply can't cycle through. I can't lift that bike for very far. It's quite heavy and bulky. Other people can't lift the bikes at all. Other issues where people have to look behind them when they're crossing side roads is a good example. We need to avoid that. And flush curbs, flush surfaces all the time. For pedestrians where they're crossing cycle tracks, we can use mini zebras. We should be using tactile paving. Give people a good cue on who goes where, who has the right priority, so we can make it easy. And one important thing, which I guess I knew as somebody who cycles, but avoiding the need to stop expending energy because you're getting moving again is quite important. The Dutch reckon it's something like 75 to 100 meters for every single stop that somebody makes. So if you think about a journey where you have to stop at every side road, your journey, if you like, in theory, is now extended by 75 to 100 meters every time you have to stop. Avoiding very tight turns, single stage crossings if possible, and non-staggered two-stage crossings if unavoidable, such as the photo there. And very important is signal timings, which take into account the fact that some people need time to get moving. So that may be their own power, or it just may be the size of the cycle. So you've got advanced greens, I think in Cambridge, that come on just before the main traffic lights, perhaps 4 seconds, 5 seconds. Some people need a bit more time to get moving. So if we can achieve all of those design principles and design details, we make cycling accessible for one particular group. It's great for everybody. And here is a chap here I dubbed the king of the embankment in central London. How this kid managed to pop a wheel on a Boris bike, I've absolutely no idea. Things weigh a ton, but he feels perfectly safe doing it there. He's separated from traffic. It's a nice smooth surface to get himself going. Happy days. That's what we're aiming for. And also, by aiming for making it accessible for everybody cycling, we can actually make it easier for people who don't cycle. We're getting lots of mobility scooter users now. Micro mobility is on its way, whether we like it or not. So decent cycle tracks and cycle facilities make it a great experience for more than cyclists. Okay, so we are developing resources. We can't possibly cover the whole country and every single issue that people raise. So we're trying to give resources and signposting to enable people to help themselves, if you like. So if your local authority has created a barrier, we're going to try and empower you to deal with that yourself. But we're also looking at good practice as well, and ways of helping people take action. So stuff will be on our website, and I'll mention that again in just a second. And at some point, we'll look at some case studies to help inspire people. We've looked to take a test case against somebody for putting barriers in, but so far they've chickened out when we've pointed things out to them. So that's a work in progress. It'd be nice to have something in law, but yeah, scaring people to do the right thing isn't a bad second place, I guess. What we'd like them to do is actually not do it in the first place. So notwithstanding the current situation we find ourselves in, campaign for this year was Bash the Barriers, and to try and get rid of some of these mazes of ironwork. I guess with things like physical or social distancing, where people have to cram together to get through gaps, it's probably another good reason to get rid of them now. There was going to be a year of action in London, but it's difficult in the current situation. But you know, we will do our best behind the scenes at the moment. And so really, this is kind of a bit of a roundup as a prompt. So the world has changed in a few weeks, very, very quickly. We've had a significant drop in motor traffic. And what that's done now is some people are no longer scared to be on the road. So they've come out, they've started cycling perhaps for the first time in years, first time at all. So we can see there's a latent demand there, and it goes back to Camcycle's campaigns at the moment. We know that local authorities are struggling to understand the legislation. People are interpreting different things in different ways. Some are being scared off altogether and not taking the action. And so far, there's been very little help from the government. We are expecting an announcement shortly. It was meant to be this week, but it's been put back. So watch this space. So I'd imagine the people who are ready and prepared may get some help, but we have to keep pushing and dare say bullying the government. We'll come back to the coronavirus dimension in a bit, I think, in the discussion, because it's quite a useful subject at the moment. So how can we react tactically? So that's how do we deal with stuff at the moment in terms of deploying temporary measures, such as what we have here in Leicester. How do we keep things accessible? So this is a really good example, because the current layout has you going along a shared use footway and swinging into the road. Now, previously, you were doing that into traffic, so at least it's protected now. But if you were using a three-wheel cycle, you get tipped as you make that turn to get into the road. So although that's good, you're protected, it may not be as accessible as we'd like. Beyond sort of the tactics and the immediate reaction, what is the strategy for the recovery phase? And this is going to be measured in years, not months. It's going to take years. And what will the new normal look like? Will it be business as usual as it was? Will it be something different that we'd like to shape? How's the politics going to go with this? So we now have a website. We didn't have it when I came to Camcycle before, so that's up and running. We do now monitor our Twitter feed a bit more at Beyond Bicycle, and hashtag Beyond the Bicycle to flag any good practice that we can look at. And I think some of you would have seen this, even in your city where you should be getting it right, you get it wrong sometimes. I don't know what's happened with that. Is that still like it? Matt's smiling. So there, that's it. Thank you very much. I'll just roll back to coronavirus because I think that's a good point to discuss.
Thanks, Mark. Shall we turn the screen sharing off and we can have a chat? Excellent. And if we do this, then our fabulous Camcycle members can see 3 faces. So I've just brought in one of our trustees, Matthew Danish, to the conversation as well, because undoubtedly we'll want some local context for some of the questions that people come up with. So I will now invite our guests to ask questions on Facebook. You can send us a tweet. We're keeping an eye on that. Do expect a bit of a delay, but we'll do our best. But in the interim, Matt, perhaps you have a question to get us started.
Yeah, hi everyone. Great to be here on this call. And so yeah, we could talk about a few things. We could talk about, for example, a recent issue has been, you did kind of touch on this, the curb segregation between footway and cycleway. Could you go into a little bit more detail about some ideas for that? For example, we would like to see separate footways, dedicated cycleways, and a detectable curb going along it so that people who are using canes or with guide dogs can, tell where they're going, basically.
So I think at the moment, we've got 2 problems. I think the first problem for the UK, and this probably goes back to a policy stroke design level, we still don't have any up-to-date national guidance. Again, we keep getting promised it, keeps getting pushed back. Whether that guidance will deal with these issues in detail, I'm not sure at the moment. So we've got lots of things pushing here. We're looking at providing separate space, which I don't think anyone would disagree with. We're looking at providing a detectable curb change in level, tactile strip, call it what you like, between the footway and the cycle track. And each option that we have available to us is somewhat of a compromise. So if you had the footway and the cycle track at the same level, you end up with like a very small delineator block, a bit of a hump on it. A cane user can run the cane along, which is fine as far as it goes. But then we have the issue of potentially people wandering into the cycle space and vice versa, which we see. If you have things at the same level, then you end up with lots of tactile paving everywhere, which can be a trip hazard. It can throw people off the cycles. So again, it's a horrible compromise. If you go for a step cycle track, if you have a vertical curb of say 100 millimeters or 4 inches, generally speaking, most visually impaired people are happy with that because it is detectable. As soon as that curb starts to get lower and lower, it becomes less detectable. There was research that showed that 60 millimeters is detectable by everybody, and down to 50 millimeters, most people can detect it. And when I say it's been shown, it's a lab study, so we haven't got proper real-world trials of this stuff, and we really should have it, but that would take central leadership or a big, something like TfL or Transport for Greater Manchester actually do a trial, because government doesn't seem to want to be interested in this level of detail. The example I showed in Bristol with a 30-degree slope, that kind of slope, as far as I know, is not particularly tested. In Bristol, there was consultation locally, and I understand that local access groups discussed it, they've seen it, and they were reasonably happy with it. The good thing about having that slope is it's good for cycle users who can't dismount, but it may not be detectable by everybody, except you do have that difference or change in level, which is helpful. So I think all being considered and all the options we've got, personally, I prefer the Bristol approach because it probably captures most of the things we're trying to do. It does get rid of the tactile paving, which is a nuisance for everybody, which is a big bonus for me. And it allows a cycle track to be left by people that need it, who can't dismount. It's a question asked of the Dutch a lot, how do visually impaired people deal with that environment? And again, I've yet to see a convincing response. I'm sure there's stuff there, been doing it for long enough, but it's the kind of thing like floating bus stops. It's a thing that rages for everybody, and really it's about engagement, I think, and we want to try and get people out using this stuff to see how they do navigate, work with people, watch people, see how they behave, how they use things. I wish I had a really simple answer, but there isn't one.
Thank you so much for that detail. Maybe we can segue a little bit into accessibility for potential temporary works on pavement, widening, or temporary cycle lanes. What would we look out for in terms of making sure that everyone of all abilities is able, whether they're walking with a cane or they're cycling with a tricycle or whatever you can think of, how do we make sure that these are done right in the temporary, possibly experimental schemes?
I think you've got the, so take the example where we may cone off a traffic lane and use that for walking space. What I've seen being deployed at the moment is you get these bright yellow temporary plastic ramps that go in that roadworks guys use a lot for pedestrian diversions. They're okay, they're pretty steep, so they may not be the best solution for something. I'd like to say short term, but I think some of these measures could be in for quite a long time. And with temporary situations, perhaps something should be treated as permanent if it's going to be there for 6 months maybe, and perhaps we need to do a bit more design work. For cycle users, I'd be wary of layouts that change the gradient quickly, especially when you're turning. So if you're turning and you get tilted, on certain cycles you're off completely. Possibly the people deploying these things should get some expert help from local access groups, from the local cycling campaign. Beyond the bicycle, if people have got questions specifically of us, we've got lots of expertise within the group. But different questions are different issues, whether it's from a design point of view or a user point of view. But I think we're all feeling our way with this, Matt, to be honest, at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, let's bring in some questions from our viewers, I guess we say, our guests. This one's come through from Martin, and then just disappeared off my screen again. Okay. How best to deal with the supposed problem of motorbikes on trails, to which the usual response of local authorities is putting awful non-accessible barriers up. And with police resources so low, is there some way these could be done differently? So basically, how do we keep the motorbikes out that keep accessibility available?
The simple and very blunt answer is, if you put in something to stop a motorbike, you will stop people using adapted bikes. So you will discriminate against somebody. One of the coalition members, he uses various cycles, but the one I've seen him use the most is his recumbent cycle, which is, needs a big turning space. He will not get through barriers. It brings up a whole load of equality law. If somebody is disabled and this type of barrier physically prevents them getting access to a service, which is a trail or a highway, it's a service, then there is a claim. So that's where we start some of our action. Look, we point out the law, say what the consequences are. One of our members is fully prepared to go and get himself wedged in one of these. And he has in the past, I believe, to get some action changed. And it's very, very easy for the police to say, we've got no resources, we can't do anything about it. And the local authority to say, we put some barriers up for a quiet life. Very, very easy. I get why people do it. I get why they've done it. The best way to stop people being antisocial on a route is to get people using the route so it's overlooked. You won't stop somebody with a motorbike at 3 in the morning determined to get in there to mess about. That needs enforcement. So if we can get more people using these routes as much as possible, and then get the intelligence of when the real problems are and target the real times as a problem, or it may be a certain time on Saturday afternoon or whatever. And in some ways, some of these routes, if they're just leisure routes and they're not heavily used, there may be a problem with the routing itself. It may not actually be helpful. In some situations, probably more urban, if you've got like a filtered road or a connection between two cul-de-sacs or something, there is an argument actually to allow motorcyclists through. If people are going through slowly and safely, that's not a problem. It might help the pizza delivery company. No problem at all with that. A lot of the people that causing trouble, they're not licensed, they're not insured, the bike's not registered. So it is a criminality element of society. That's not going to answer the question because there isn't a single quick answer.
It seems to me that we're dealing with a legacy issue of poor planning and design that creates so many of these routes where this becomes a problem. But particularly for new developments, we need to learn and design them in a way where routes are overlooked, where you can have accessibility to get where you need to go without having to go through sort of back alleys or, you know, places that just don't feel safe. I think it's not just that we've got barriers in the way, but we're also creating routes that are possibly a problem for other reasons. So you've just made me realize that we have to think ahead of how, so we plan in a way that doesn't require barriers, but how do we deal with the ones we've already got that exist is a big problem. Another question that we have had come through on Facebook is there's a lot of resistance from some people within the disability community about bus stop bypasses. However, in the Netherlands, they've had them for almost 70 years. And indeed, in Cambridge, we've had some form of that type of infrastructure. It was just never called a bus stop bypass. It was more of a shared use path that went by the bus stop. And no one seemed to have a problem with those. Do you see the concerns as a reaction to any kind of change, or are there genuine problems that need to be solved with these bus stop bypasses? And if so, does anywhere else see the same kind of problems, particularly the Netherlands?
It's a good question, and it is a hot potato, I guess. So if we go back to my presentation when I talked about everybody comes at this stuff from their own experiences, their own, you know, what's happening in their lives, how they travel around. It would be so easy for somebody to say, well, look, here's a report that somebody's done, they're absolutely safe. The fact that people aren't getting hit on them is a good thing. The fact that actually there isn't many near misses on them is a good thing. But if you're worried about getting onto your bus, you've made an effort to get to a certain location to get your bus, you now have something new to cross. It's unfamiliar. You don't necessarily hear people cycling along the cycle track. You don't have the comforts of perhaps a signalised crossing to get across there. And that's a whole different argument on signalised crossings on cycle tracks, but I won't go there. So do you put in a mini zebra crossing? Does that give somebody enough confidence to cross? It may help some people, may not help others. And I think some of the experience that people in Scotland have had more recently is actually going out with people discussing it, goes a long way to find the common ground. If you're coming at the problem, absolutely not, you'll never change my mind, that's a difficult challenge for anybody. The flip side is, and again, I can't speak for disabled cyclists because I'm not a disabled person, but I've heard anecdotes of disabled cyclists saying, well, hang on a minute, the bus stop bypass means I've got my mobility and independence back. It's safe for me to get around on these main roads again. So at some point we need to decide, and possibly through design detailing and how we make the routes from a cycling point of view, it's absolutely clear that somebody's got priority there. It's absolutely clear that they need to slow down potentially, because you can cause the greatest harm. If you're on the bike, you can cause the greatest harm. You may actually cause yourself harm if you hit somebody, which is possibly why the data shows that, you know, interactions, I would call, isn't the data. But I think it's talking, it's listening. We don't have to agree with each other necessarily. There's been complaints that in the Netherlands, visually impaired people have been ignored in many ways. I don't know. Again, this is just what I've heard. I've not read any studies from the Netherlands on this. You'd think they've got it right, but perhaps they haven't. They don't do their drop curves as well as we do, for example. But to boil it down into one word, talking, I think.
Thanks, Mark. And I think that's such a good point, is that this seems to be framed as disabled people using the bus stop versus able-bodied people cycling, but actually the the cycling infrastructure is to make it possible for more people to cycle, and for disabled people to cycle, and for mobility scooters to use these cycle lanes, or as we've started to hear a new term, mobility lanes. And I think that perhaps that then leads to the question of how can we better work with these stakeholder groups and with the representatives of the disabled community. I know that Camcycle, we've got some great advocates within our membership who use hand cycles and mobility scooters and have other types of mobility issues. But is there any best practice for working with other groups to try and show that we're all working to the same aim, which is to get as many people independently mobile as possible?
Again, I think, to be honest, there isn't any national best practice on it, because government's approach for quite a long time now has been, I won't get too political, but I will mention Eric Pickles and his whole deregulation approach and localism. You know, we had the Localism Act, so the government approach has been on local transport that's best evolved locally and dealt with locally. So if you've got somewhere like Cambridge City, for example, you have Camcycle, a big powerful voice. There's lots of parts of the country where for cycling there is no voice at all, and in fact for people, perhaps if someone's visually impaired, there's no voice for them at all. So as cycling advocates, perhaps you can reach out to other groups if they exist. If not, there may be individuals who, you know, they're interested. There is a shared issue here about trying to reduce car usage, trying to make public transport run better. So if you are reliant on the bus, you don't have to wait for ages in traffic on it. And I think that's the big failing. We don't have kind of a national register of here's a good scheme, here's how well the consultation went, here's what we learned from that particular piece of engagement. I would say Scotland seems to be leading the way on it, from what I can work out. You know, there's groups on Twitter, you can pick them up, but sadly we don't have this national leadership on this kind of thing.
Something we can aspire to, but perhaps we've got more urgent things to work on first nationally. Further on from that theme, we've had a question from Tim about how can you, or how do you, as a non-visibly disabled cyclist, so I guess having a hidden disability, feel that you can discuss on behalf. No, I've misinterpreted this question, but actually it leads to two questions. So if you're not a disabled cyclist, how do you discuss on behalf of those who are disabled without getting laughed down? So you could be seen as to maybe not truly reflecting that person's experience. But then also the other side of that is what about if you have a hidden disability and people might not believe you? And while it is a fraction, an absolute fraction of that situation, I've had some hidden mobility issues in the past, which has limited how far I could walk, and I wasn't able to drive for a while, but I could cycle, and no one would have guessed that from looking at me. And I know there are many other people with more prevalent or severe disability issues that people can't see. So two questions: how do we represent people with disabilities when we don't have them, and how do we show that some disabilities are hidden?
I think they're excellent questions. So my answer to the first question about representing disabled people, the short answer there is I can't. I can't speak for other people. So I can only come at this subject from my background, what I know, what I've learned. I guess from the coalition's point of view, because we are so diverse from that point of view, we can cover the issues, but perhaps we're not representing the issues. That's probably a fairer way of putting it. So if I was talking to somebody about, let's say for argument's sake, one of our members, he had a stroke and he uses a tricycle to get around because it's so much easier for him, electric cargo cycle. So I can say, I know how he has issues with cambers and gradients and stuff like that. So I'm not speaking on his behalf, but I understand some of the problems that he faces from that point of view. I'm just going back to the question on the screen. Did that disappear? No, it's there. So that was the first point. Yeah, so the second point is about perhaps a hidden disability. And again, I can come at it from an anecdote. I had plantar fasciitis in one of my heels for ages, and it was really painful to walk. Even 100 yards, every step was painful, and yet I could cycle all day. So again, it's only my own experience. There's people who have some degree of pain every waking moment, who find cycling easier than walking. So part of this thing is, if somebody says, I've got this particular mobility issue, or it could be an imbalance issue, perhaps just believe them. That's their lived experience. So if somebody's got an issue with balance, I knew somebody years ago that said, I can't get on a bike because I've got a balance issue. And I said, well, had you considered a tricycle? Yeah, I did use a tricycle years ago, and I could cope with that. So it depends who you're talking to, whether you know them, how it's framed. So if someone's asking for advice, how might I go about cycling if I can't balance? Well, here's some different types of tricycles that you could use.
Absolutely. And I think as campaigners, it's so important that we listen and we reflect, as you said, people's experiences. We might not know what their experience is like, but we can put some technical information around the provision that they need. Yep. But also we have a platform to share those stories and to talk to people and say, actually, that's a really fascinating experience that other people might not believe anyone has. So let's use our platform to share that. And I think Camcycle's getting better and better at that. And we've had Isabel Clement from Wheels for Wellbeing come and speak to us, and she's talked about using imagery. Yep. And it is tough. It's tough to go and get those images, but we have to make that effort. And once we start telling those stories and using that inclusive and diverse imagery, more people start to come forward because they can see that we do actually reflect their experience back to them. So very important to tell the stories. An excellent question from Yasmin. Thanks, Yasmin. Yasmin occasionally wonders how gender issues affect our perceptions of infrastructure. Like many women, Yasmin's always done the majority of the childcare in their house, which means that she's always done the majority of pushchair pushing and big bike using. Is Beyond the Bicycle thinking about sex imbalance in cycle usage like this? And I would say that actually a topic that really fascinates me as well is thinking about gender issues in land use planning and how we lay out our communities to think about more users rather than just commuting to and from work by car and parking in the driveway.
So hot off the press today, I've been doing the University of Amsterdam's 5-week course, the MOOC, whatever it stands for. And I learned today about pattern language, which it was, oh, you have thumbs up there. It was I read a paper today, which I had to stop and look in the dictionary every 5 minutes, really complicated. The interesting thing about pattern language, though, is it turns out that Beyond the Bicycle actually is pattern language. It's a kind of catch-all term that can mean anything. So from this point of view, the short answer is yes. The slightly longer answer is I'm kind of not qualified to talk about that in that level of detail. Going back to my previous comment, but we have people, again, within the coalition who do take the children to school by cycle. They juggle all sorts of different things in their lives, and without the cycle, they couldn't manage it. So yes, and there's thoughts going on behind the scenes with people who know more about it than I do.
And actually, I think that's where Cambridge is in an amazing position, where we have so many people using cargo bikes, particularly, and so many ways to carry children on bikes. And we need to really be capturing those stories to help show other places that it can be done at this kind of scale in this country. And Yasmin is a great example of that, with some amazing adventurous holidays with the kids on bikes. There's another comment here, which is hard to interpret while moderating, so I'm just going to read it and let's see where we go. Perhaps the frame of inclusive design can help. The aim is to make changes to infrastructure. Disability sets the most onerous design requirement. If we satisfy those requirements and you also encompass all the requirements of the non-disabled user, this is an argument for prioritizing the disabled requirement. Absolutely. If we design at that standard, then we're designing for everybody. Are we, Mark?
It's a massive yes with a tiny no at the end. So it's yes as in, of course it's yes. The reason for the little no at the end is there are even configurations of cycle which go beyond what a disabled user might be using. So I'm thinking of, for example, the Armadillo bike, which is a 6-wheeler that's very popular up in Sweden, which cargo logistics companies are using. So it's kind of the right width to fit down the cycle tracks, but this thing is very long, it's articulated. It's probably not the cycle of choice by many disabled cyclists. And one of the coalition members, he's got another cycle, which is even longer than perhaps what you might select as a design cycle. So if you're meeting the needs of disabled people, that's a massive yes, but we need to go beyond that a little bit, hence beyond the bicycle, I guess. It can mean anything to anybody. So yes, we absolutely need to make things accessible for disabled people as our minimum standard, if you like, but I think there's still more that we can do.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to briefly hand this over to Matt to talk a little bit about some of the temporary infrastructure ideas that we could implement now to help us create that safe space for cycling and walking. And Mark, if you can stick around, I think it would be great to get your insight on how these things can be implemented. But I think it's also really important that we think about how we're inclusive with these temporary changes as well, because it's so easy to put up some cones and say job done, but if we've got curbs that people can't get over, if we're creating issues for people with visual impairments, then we're really not doing the best we can. We all know some compromises are going to be made for everybody in what we're doing, but I think it'll be great to after hearing your talk, think about it with that lens as well. So Matt, I'll hand over to you to talk about some of these ideas, and then we've got time for a bit more discussion as well.
Yeah, thanks, Roxanne. Thanks, Mark, for the presentation. Actually, I've got two sets of slides here, and one of them is more about specific areas, and the other one is about techniques and stuff we could use. What do you think we should start with? Are you still here?
Sorry, was that a question for
you?
me, Matt?
Unfortunately, because it's very difficult to ask on.
Yeah, I think that let's just start with the broad ideas.
Okay.
And then we can go into the specifics of what we can actually do. And I'll say to everybody listening along, take note. And if you see something in this presentation, you go, oh, I know just the spot for something like that or where that's needed, then please use our form and tell us about it.
Okay, so I'm screen sharing now. Hopefully that's working. Yep, here it comes. All right. Hello, we've prepared a presentation to talk about some ways that we here in Cambridge could apply, or some techniques that we could apply. Let's see if this works. I'm in the wrong screen, sorry. There we go. Okay, so what I've presented here is Cambridge already has high levels of cycling, so it's a little bit different from some other parts of the country where you might have 2 or 3 or 4% cycling. We already have 25% cycling or more, and hopefully even more people are thinking about it now because it's an opportunity to get exercise, which is really important in times like this, as well as get around and go on key journeys, go to the shops, go to essential jobs and things like that. So the problem Cambridge has actually is that we have a cycle route network that in some places is really narrow, where instead of, so we have an existing cycle network, but much of it we kind of put up with. We put up with some of the pinch points, we put up with some of the kind of, let's say, cozy situations because it lets us avoid dangerous roads. But now we're in a situation where cozy and tight and narrow is really bad. So what can we do about that? So here's, I just put up some photographs of some photographs from before the pandemic of, let's say, narrow places that you may be familiar with. So we have also some of the issues that we are facing are, we have essential cycle routes that we need to either provide because they go to places like the hospital, or we need to divert around pinch points, for example, the narrow bridges. We have narrow cycling bridges and very wide road bridges. So that's an opportunity to try and fix the issue. And then we have roads like Mill Road, where you have people squeezed onto narrow pavements in a densely populated area. And although the amount of traffic has reduced, the speed has not necessarily. In fact, in some cases, we're seeing ultra speeding or much faster than before, which is really dangerous and could put even more people in hospital. Okay. I had a few slides about what they're doing in other places, but we've seen a lot of that now. Some things, temporary cycle lanes, open streets, financial support, things like that. So a lot of the stuff is actually drawn from Mark's work, writings and blog. So hopefully he can jump in at some point. But I was suggesting that the things that we could do very quickly and easily are using traffic management, as we often do, putting out cones and barriers usually done for construction works, but it could be done now as well. We have the skills. Speed limit reduction and actually enforcement would be a big issue, but both of them are just, the reduction is just a paper issue, and enforcement means police resources. Painting wider cycle lanes, again, is like a little bit like temporary cycle lanes, but a little bit more work. Suggesting we can remove those anti-pedestrian railings that constrain spaces so much. So those could just get unbolted and removed, quite frankly. Letting people know with signs that things have changed. And also, hopefully, well, we've talked about this with Mark a bit, but making sure that whatever we do is accessible for everyone. Mark, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to say on, when you're talking about things like taking guardrail out, that's a really quick win, because not only do you get your ½ meter back that you're barriered from, if you like, from the curb, because people don't walk right up against the barrier, you actually get a bit more space back with that as well. Can you go back a slide, Matt?
Yeah.
Is that possible? Because I was going to pick up one other thing. Oh yeah, so things like painting and repainting cycle lanes and stuff like that. You can, in theory, so with your photos of Brooklyn and Berlin there, we can actually do a very similar thing and call it a cycle track. Even with a solid line, you can argue that's not a mandatory cycle lane, I guess. But running out a line of cones and a bit of paint and some cycle logos, I calculated it the other day as sort of £7 to £10 a metre to do. So you need a budget, and if you've got no budget, it's a problem. But if you have a small budget, it can go a long way.
I've also got some more information up from you on the current slide. So if anyone's interested, you can go to that link. If you don't want to type it in, I'll send it in the chat later. But I've summarized some of the things you said about enabling laws for doing this stuff. In fact, a lot can be done without traffic regulation orders.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So what you've got there in the middle, Part 5 of the Highways Act, that's really, really powerful, and I don't think people realise. Somebody asked me the question earlier today about the need to consult on widening footways, building cycle tracks and stuff like that. And under normal circumstances, you may be doing that kind of work as part of a bigger scheme that you'd consult on. Local authorities have general consultation duties across the piece, so whether it's social care or education or whatever. So there is some responsibility, but I think you need to be proportionate in you're reacting to an emergency, a crisis. Things have to be done quickly. We accept we may upset a few people along the way. So as long as we're open and transparent about why we're doing stuff and how it's going to happen, and we can react to any problems that it creates, I think that's a reasonable approach using Part 5.
Move on. So one technique is filtering, and actually, while we were sitting here, I noticed a photo on Twitter of Tower Hamlets. They've just installed these planters in the road. So that's the middle one. So I just added it to the presentation. So that's fresh off the press. But yeah, so filtering can be rolled out very quickly, but it does require an ETO, as far as we can tell, or an emergency It could be done with emergency orders, but that requires a threat to safety. Is that right, Mark?
Yeah, so on the closures, Brighton have used a temporary traffic order, and they've said we're interpreting the law that we need to do something because of people's safety. Great, again, no help from the government. They've made the decision at Brighton, and they've written it down. Fantastic. Otherwise, I mean, you can use a permanent traffic order if you go through the process, but I would say use an experimental traffic order, which, you know, you're doing it on the basis that you expect the scheme to be kept afterwards. You don't tend to use an experimental scheme to do something for a few weeks and take it in. There's got to be a reasonable expectation of it being a scheme you wish to implement. And I think some of the councils that have just started doing this have got that expectation, which is great. And you can develop that quickly as well. You can say, well, actually, we've got this crisis. We've seen traffic drop. We don't need that capacity. We need to give people space. And actually, long term, we'd like to give these neighbourhoods back to people. That's a good enough reason to go and do it, I think. So, you know, the best time to have started an ETO was 6 weeks ago. The second best time is today. Yeah.
Let's see. Lane reuse, I think, is another fun one that they've done a lot in Berlin. But I have a photo on the right where they have a lane coned off right here in Cambridge. And actually, there's a few examples around Cambridge right at this moment where they have lanes taken out of service. They could just do that with a cycle lane. I mean, make it a cycle lane, basically.
Yeah, we've had a little message to try and explain our terms a bit more. so ETO, experimental traffic order. A traffic order basically takes the status quo of anybody can just use the street, and it puts restrictions on how people can use it. So an experimental traffic order for a road closure would stop people driving through that road closure, but we can allow cycles through. I've got loads of blogs on it. They're long and boring for people interested in technical stuff, but essentially it's a way of closing a road to through traffic, for example, or building a permanent cycle lane, for example. But in the examples on the screen, you know, coning an area of the road off for cycling, it doesn't necessarily need a traffic order. It gets complicated if there's parking and other things going on. But at the moment, we're looking at the easy stuff for how can we claim some space, give people some space. I think what's the one on the right there, Matt?
That's actually just construction works locally that I noticed in passing.
And it's helping, and it's actually helping having it there. I guess the thing that's slightly perverse here is it's very clear in law that we can close something down for construction works. We can close something down because of counter-terrorism. We can close something down if we go through a massive, long-winded process, but we can't do it in response to a public health emergency. And that's a piece of law that needs to be overhauled. You know, once the crisis is behind us and we're in the recovery phase, yeah, I really hope the government go and look at this again, because if you could, as a local authority, if the law was specific and said, you know, you want to prevent danger to the public, and preventing danger to the public can include a response to a major health crisis, brilliant. Loads of local authorities would be all over this. So I hope the government are listening. They're probably not, but I hope they are.
I want to jump ahead a little bit. The cycle lane widening is another one that seems to be done. It could be discretionary, which is interesting, that you could just paint the cycle lane or just widen a cycle lane at the discretion of the highway authority, effectively an officer even. So while we wouldn't normally really be interested in painted cycle lanes, they do have the advantage that they can be rolled out very quickly. And at least it gives, if they're wide enough, they could give some indication of what the safe passing distance is. However, we have a lot of narrow cycle lanes, like on the one on the left is Coldham's Lane. It's really bad. And unfortunately, I noticed it was just repainted last week. There was a missed opportunity. So how does this sound as a means of potentially creating some temporary infrastructure, at least to let people know, hey, you know, this is a place that people are going to be cycling a lot?
I think as a quick solution, paint for cycle lanes is something like 75p to £1 per metre laid. A cycle logo is probably a couple of £100 a logo tops. So you could roll stuff out really quickly. The one on the right, I think just used with care, because it is where motor traffic levels are a bit lower. But absolutely, we're trying to give people space now. So what I would say is, with the one on the left at Codham's Lane, it looks like there's a centre line there as well.
Yeah.
So widen the cycle lanes, but take the centre lines out. There is evidence that removing centre lines helps slow drivers down by a mile or two an hour. So it's definitely worth doing.
Yes.
Every little helps.
Yeah, so there was John Parkin and one of his students, I suppose, wrote an article, a paper about 6 years ago. So for the academics here who might be interested, you can check that out. Another interesting one, I think, is junction redesign. So we have a lot of junctions with a lot of space, and especially roundabouts. Roundabouts with multiple lanes, they've always been a problem, and now they are racetracks. So it seems to me that it would be very, it's not a perfect solution, but one thing that could be done is at least reduce the roundabouts to a single lane, and also junction arms that are coming into the junctions, either a roundabout or traffic signal. Those could be reduced to a signal lane, because what is the point of having multiple lanes when there's so many fewer cars? That space could be protected walking and cycling space.
Yeah, again, that's stuff we can just go and do. With your third photo there, I would say that in that situation, we're coning off the inside lane so drivers use the outside lane, just so that you have to use a steering wheel to get around the roundabout. In fact, how the roundabout probably should have been designed in the first place.
Oh yeah, the third photo there, I should tell you, that's a cute one. I happened to notice that, I think it was a while ago. This is part of a Highways England A14, I think, construction project. So it's actually just works.
Yeah.
They have it coned off for whatever reason. And I noticed, hey, that's almost the same thing as what we're proposing, except yes, you're right, the wrong lane is coned off.
Yeah, that layout there is if people were using the right-hand lane, that's the safest that roundabout will be. But yeah, we can just do that stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
there's actually a live example, which I didn't put a photo of the A14 going into Histon and Impington, where they did cone off the near side lane, and that could be used potentially for cycling. Do you mind if while we have a few more minutes, I'll jump over to the other slides. Actually, no, I had a slide on accessibility. Maybe we should cover that too while you're here. But of course, the railing, which we talked about already, this kind of railing could easily be removed. We know it's dangerous for pedestrians. We know that it causes more crashes. Drivers actually, when TfL removed it, they found that that the junctions actually became safer in the next 3 years after the removal. So it seems to me that this stuff, could you really have a team, it's like 1 or 2 people go around, a nice socially isolated team, go around and just, I don't know, remove this stuff? How hard would that be?
Again, it's a very quick and easy win, and it does a job we should have done years ago with it. Most guardrails not needed, in my view.
I put up a few ideas for how to improve accessibility. We talked about some of these. I think we talked about temporary ramps. I got the blister tactile paving idea from you, but we didn't talk about it. Green man phases coming up automatically, shortening cycle time. Yeah, and just the fact that it's easier to cross roads that are narrower in general. What do you think about some of this stuff? Would it be useful to talk about more with the council, for example?
Yeah, so I mean, let's say for argument's sake, we've taken the width of a road down with cones or barriers. It may be that we need some tactile paving to recreate the crossing point. Again, it depends on the length of time it's going to be there. So there's things we can do around that. Traffic signals is interesting. Yeah, we can change that around. We can on some installations, probably standalone crossings. In theory, we can rest on green for the pedestrians. So it stays green all the time unless a car comes. Very, very unusual to see it, but we can do it here. Yeah, missing drop curbs and other obstacles. Again, it's just a good opportunity to get out there and get some of these things, housekeeping work almost, get that done. question popped up about, do we need a safety audit for this kind of stuff? I mean, you don't need a safety audit for anything other than work on trunk roads and motorways. So I would say it's down to the scale of the scheme, the experience of the people working on it. Often comes up with taking a guardrail out. TfL had a really complicated process for taking it out. They realised it was massively complicated and subjective anyway. So as long as you've got people who are experienced in safety works looking at this stuff, you don't necessarily need a safety audit.
Okay. I switched to another tab, I thought, but maybe it didn't work. Let me just restart that. If we have a few more moments, try this again. So I put together some examples of where in Cambridge this could be useful. So Mark won't necessarily be familiar with that, but maybe some of the people watching on Facebook will know. So for example, I talked earlier about how we have an existing cycle network. We have a lot of these small little river bridges, and that's a pinch point, all these little river bridges, because a lot of them are narrow, really too narrow to be used by many people. But we do have this massive 1971 bridge called Elizabeth Way. It has 4 lanes of the carriageway, unbelievably. So many, actually one of them is a bus lane. So this strikes me as this is really the space that we want to encourage more people to cycle over. Normally it's kind of an unfriendly 1970s scheme, you know, with kind of bleak roads and roundabouts at either end. But if we use some of the temporary cycle lane magic, so to speak, we could actually create a safe cycle lane on both sides of the road here, and then do some works on the roundabout in a similar vein to make sure that people can get through that safely as well. And then we can take the pressure off of the other river crossings. So that was one, I think, one of the more urgent things that we need here in Cambridge.
Yeah, it's actually, I do know the site. I've cycled it, so absolutely, yeah. Take lane 1 for cycle track. I'll keep the terminology as cycle track because that's the powers we would use. And if you cone the roundabout down to a single lane in and out for each arm for drivers, a single lane around the roundabout, then all of a sudden you can probably create some temporary islands and crossing points for pedestrians. Because that goes to that, there's a subway there, Matt, isn't there?
There is, and I'd rather people not use it.
So yeah, so keep people on the surface. That could be done. It'd take a bit of effort to design it, but it could definitely be done there.
We've already covered guardrails, so I'll jump ahead to this one, which this one's not too far away, actually. It's on Newmarket Road. So you have this Abbey Street crossing, which is oh, I should have shown actually just how narrow that pavement is. But you can see in the middle photo where the 2 women are standing, that's pretty much the width of it entirely. So as you can tell, and it's a shared use pavement, and it's one of the only safe places to cross Newmarket Road in this area. And so here we are. The family on the leftmost photo spent about 5 minutes trying not to push the button, finally finding some scraps on the ground to push the button with, and then eventually crossing. The father was very afraid to try and go against the light. But it occurs to me that if there was if you had the near side lanes coned off, because again, they're just completely pointless to have them as they are, then that would create a lot more space for people to wait, or even they could get across the road much more easily because they would only have to cross 1 lane at a time instead of 2. Yeah. So Cambridge doesn't have many big roads, but this is one of them, unfortunately. There are a bunch of drop curbs in the area, but there might be a spot where an additional ramp could help. Let's see what else we got. Other parts of Newmarket Road, which, did we cover this one? I suggested that this particular junction is extremely unfriendly to people cycling as it is, and also unfriendly to people walking. There is actually no crossing of Newmarket Road here for pedestrians. It's a long-standing problem. So at least this would create some safe areas that people could go when they cross or when they're cycling here. Mill Road is another favorite to talk about, because right now Mill Road there's a lot less traffic coming down it, but there's a lot of people need to walk in the road because the pavements are very narrow, and there's a lot of speeding traffic, and we're still getting these close passes. So now there is a bus route on the road. So that is one issue. So here, what I've suggested might make sense. As you know, we can talk about it some more, but it might make sense to have a bus gate somewhere along Mill Road. So at least we can try and cut out the speeding traffic.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of a temporary bus gate?
Not a temporary bus gate. I guess you could take the view that Bryson have used, that this is about keeping the public safe, and use a temporary traffic order. Mm-hmm. I don't know if one ever done that way before. I think what Bryson have done with their road closure is pretty unique anyway. But experimental traffic order again, put the bus gate in, and the first 6 months is your consultation period. See how it goes. No reason why not. Well, there's lots of reasons, I guess, political, money, and the rest of it. But technically, in a technical sense, there's no reason why not.
Another road with similar problems to Mill Road is Arbery Road. It has pretty much almost the same problems, except it doesn't have a bus route on it. And so, in fact, we don't have to worry about getting a bus down it, which I think maybe makes things a little bit simpler. I also happen to know that the residents have actually done a lot of legwork to find out what people here would like to see, and they already have done a survey and talked to a lot of people to find out that, in fact, there's a lot of support for filtering on this road. People have really quite had enough of the speeding traffic.
So again, I mean, that would be ripe for an experimental traffic order. Mm-hmm. If it's got lots of local support, then definitely the time to try it.
This one is actually a maintenance issue. When you come down Hills Road, you actually slide around in gravel on the cycle lane now. It's so bad, and it seems to me that this is just maintenance at this point. There's probably a bunch of places in the city where this is the case, but this one seems very sensitive because it goes straight to Addenbrooks. So doctors cycling to work, imagine if they slip and fall on a pothole. I mean, it's just a nightmare waiting to happen. We have some other fun roundabouts that some people, I think you might like the second photo, actually. Do you see what's going on there? I came across that. The pavements are so bad in this area that this lady actually decided to take the cycle lane into the roundabout. And I have to say, I should have shown what that cycle lane looks like, because it is one of the scariest cycle lanes, possibly the most dangerous cycle lane in the city at this moment, because unfortunately, this was also the site of a death 4 weeks ago. So we don't have the full details on what happened, though. But everyone has known for many years that this particular roundabout is very dangerous. So again, we have a situation with multi-lane roundabout, multiple lanes in and out, and now we always get injuries every year here, and now someone has died potentially because of, how dangerous it is. So it seems that shrinking these roundabouts, just going around to all the multi-lane roundabouts and shrinking them to a single lane, would be one quick win that could be done.
Yep.
How are we doing for time, Roxanne? I keep going, okay. Mitchum's Corner is a gyratory with, let's say, a lot of lanes that are quite empty. Okay, 2 minutes. There's shops here. At some point, people, actually, and there's also a bus stop here where I've seen people queuing to get on the bus, and they take up the entire pavement because there's no space left over for people, on the pavement, unfortunately, because it's all been given over to this 1960s scheme. So it seems that this would be another opportunity to use the temporary pavement widening and/or cycle lane works to do some good. I wanted to talk, I didn't get a photograph of this, unfortunately, yet, so maybe we'll talk about this later. Here's one in Histon where you have a nice narrow country lane, and it goes to the shops, but there's no pavements, basically. So it seems, and this is really a road where car traffic could go a different way. There's not, if you're going through, there'll always be access for residents and access for emergency services, but look at how the people have to walk in the street to get around. It really should be a lot safer. Here's another example of narrow cycle lanes in the villages. This particular lane could be used to get to Addenbrooke's Hospital, for example, or to the Waitrose shops, but it is one of the scarier lanes in the county at the moment. We have our famous DNA cycleway, which is exactly 2 meters wide. Oops. Yes, so one thought here was, could the railway side, this will actually be ripped up in a few years when they build the South Station. So we don't want to spend too much money here, but maybe a quick thing that could be done is on the railway side, where the land, it doesn't have much biodiversity value. It's already, a brownfield. Could that be, could a temporary surface of some sort be laid down there? What would that look like potentially? And it doesn't even have to be a bound surface. It could be just to make some space for people to get away from each other. Have you been on this route? I can't remember.
No, not that one, no.
No, that's a shame. Yeah, so this, have you heard of like putting on some dust or something to make the road a little bit, the path a little bit wider?
I guess you may have to dig down a bit and replace it with something. I mean, even if it was just made to be flat.
Yeah.
On a dry day, people could walk across it without too much of a problem.
Okay.
Wouldn't take a lot of work, would it?
Here's another one I've been puzzling over is when you have a already existing shared use pavement that people have been using for a long time, but now it's actually not sufficient anymore. It's too narrow for cyclists in both directions and pedestrians. We have Milton Road is the famous one. Milton Road has one, we call it the Milton Road effect, where if you try to ride on the carriageway, you get abused. But if you ride on the shared use pavement, then you have to stop every 100 meters or so. So what could be done here? I was suggesting possibly temporary cycle lanes as an idea.
Yep.
And we have a question. All right. Okay, so questions are, narrowing the roundabout without a priority crossing would place riders in the worst position for safe use. So how can temporary changes be made safe?
I guess at roundabouts, it's the whole debate on whether you give cycle traffic priority or not, isn't it? I
guess I wouldn't be presuming to say that, because installing a zebra is probably too much at this point.
Yeah, I think for the type of things we're talking about, if we're coning off an area as a sort of cycle track area, I think as a short term, I'd probably, because don't forget, we're constraining motor traffic, we're forcing people to turn their steering wheels and stuff like that and go through slowly. So if we did invite cyclists to give way in that situation, I think most of the time you'd find the gap anyway. The crossing point would be away from the circulatory area just because of the way you grab the land. So it'd probably look more Dutch rural than UK urban, I guess. And it wouldn't be a bad compromise at this stage.
Let's see, what other questions do we have? Well, we're getting to the end here, I suppose. Unless you had any further thoughts on what to do about those roads with the shared use pavement, we could start to wrap it up.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, in a situation like that, you've got the WLA line, so you could put in a mandatory cycle lane without a traffic order now. So that's possible. If necessary in certain locations, a few ones might help protect people in approaching junctions and places like that. There's definitely options.
Great. Okay, Roxanne, do you want to pick it up from here? Great. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay, thank you so much, Matt, and particularly Mark, for your presentation, but also for just jumping in and basically being a free consultant for Cambridge. You've solved half of our problems. You've given us lots of free advice. Perhaps we need to take you to our virtual pub and buy you some beers after this. But I actually really enjoyed having that conversation and watching that conversation between you and Matt. I just thought that was great. So thank you so much. And I'll say from watching the comments coming through, we've got a lot of support for Elizabeth Way and the Newmarket Road and Abbey Road crossing. So Matt, those ideas I hope have given people a bit of inspiration about the kind of things that we could be doing around Cambridge, and Mark would sort of can feel more confident about what we propose, because we've had the expert look over this. So thank you so much. I think it's beyond the bicycle, and maybe we need to start thinking beyond the virus as well now. So what I'm going to do is just wrap things up for us now, and bear with me here. I guess it feels like it takes time, but it's still easier than swapping laptops and things in a real meeting, isn't it? Final bit of screen, and I think we have worked out how to do this so it doesn't break my computer. So I just wanted to remind everybody of our Spaces to Breathe campaign. Hopefully you've now been inspired. Please, I know I keep saying it, but it's so important right now. Sign that open letter. Share with us your ideas of where we can make improvements, because hopefully now you've seen some examples. But I'll also point out that on this same page, we've also got lots of advice for cycling during this period, how you can do that safely, maintain social distancing, what the advice is and what's appropriate. So please do go and check that out. And I just knew that we couldn't resist seeing some pictures of the new bridge. So here we have just some part 1 and part 2, I believe, of the Chisholm Trail, the Abbey Chesterton Bridge being delivered today and yesterday. And thank you to Anna for these great pictures. But yes, we can do some more virtual applause for that. But while here, of course, we don't have the reach ride. So I just thought we'd put up a couple of pictures, and it's so sad that we don't have the reach ride today. But I thought perhaps our members would like a little preview of something that's going to go in the magazine that we've got coming up. And this is written by one of our regular Reach Ride participants, Connie, who is 10. Reach Ride is one of my favorite times of the year. You get the long 24-mile bike ride where you can chat with your friends, and then you get the brilliant fair where you can go on all sorts of rides, from a scary haunted house to huge frantic Ferris wheels. I'm going to miss it so much because I love the long enjoyable bike ride, and also at the end of the bike ride you get a reward, the fair. As well as that, it's the only time I get to go to a fair. Though it takes a lot of energy and effort, I still love every moment of it, because 1, it's one way I keep fit, and 2, I get to hang out with my family friends. Last year, I did Reach Ride with 3 of my friends. Just because of lockdown doesn't mean you have to stop biking, as long as you stay away from other people, keep calm, and carry on. So if we can't go on the Reach Ride this upcoming weekend, at least we can think back to it with fond memories, and perhaps go out on a different bike ride, take some of the same route, try somewhere else. But we'd really, really love for you to share your pictures, tag us on social media, send us an email, but show us what you did instead of the Reach Ride. And hopefully we'll all be back together next year, and we'll have an extra special Reach Ride. Something else that we're missing out on because of the lockdown and the pandemic is probably going to be our big celebration for our 25th anniversary. It's not looking good for us being able to do anything in June. So we'll work up the the best idea that we can do virtually, but we do have our monthly meeting on the 2nd of June. So do join us. We'll come up with some way to share our stories and celebrate. You might have to bring your own cake. So maybe we can have a bit of a comparison of what cakes we've made to celebrate Camcycle's birthday. But watch this space. We're just finding out what will be possible, but there'll be something to celebrate in June. And our meeting is Tuesday, 2nd of June at 7 p.m. But apart from that, I would just like to say a huge, big thank you to Mark for coming all the way to Cambridge from your own home, and Matt for giving us that local context. Thank you. Thanks everyone for watching.